Okay, welcome very much to Conversations. Great pleasure to welcome to the program Alex Quinn. And Alex Quinn was a former executive director for Manhattan Neighborhood Networks, I think maybe at its initial stages. And he's engaged with an entity now, an educational entity. It's 411 or 311?
TV 411.
TV 411. Yeah. It's also got a name.
It's part of, it's within a larger not-for-profit called Education Development Center.
Yeah, I was there and it had a lot of educational work, and he's involved with that as a project manager of that. But Alex, welcome so very much to Conversation.
It's great to be here, Harold.
Well, we've met over the past experience, and as you were executive director for Manhattan Network, so you're familiar with the with the entity and everything, and we met more recently out at a major event, a major gathering, a party for the 96th birthday of the father of, in a very real sense, I think we want to talk about him and bestow all kinds of honors upon George Stoney, who was a filmmaker extraordinaire and largely responsible for the establishment of public access in a major institutional way. And we had a gathering of some hundreds of people out in Long Island at a beautiful setting to celebrate his actual 96th birthday. And you sang some wonderful Cole Porter at his request, and then he also gave a little speech, and we're going to try and bring that in quickly here and show that at the beginning as a way to kick it off. But we met there, and then not soon after that, it was just within a week or so, he passed at 96. And it was a sad thing for everybody in the media. People had come from all over the world for that picnic and everything. And so anyway, we're going to want to talk about that. And in fact, it might be okay if we could, in the booth, if you could get ready, maybe we have a piece of clip footage that was done there by our Josh. And here it is.
Happy birthday.
That's you singing Happy Birthday.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear George. Happy birthday to you. We love you, George.
The psalmist has given me the proper response, which is that my cup runneth over.
That's because you've been drinking wine all day.
And so I'd like to welcome you all here. I would first like to thank the Pulsons for tolerating me all of these years. Dennis and Betty and all the other people connected with the Pulson clan. And it's been wonderful to know this town as well. The library and the people who kept me rooted in the community as well as the New York City. But I'm awfully pleased that I'm in the new place and near NYU, and you all have the address, and I hope you will come by sometime when we can see one another. And I hope that a year from now you have a reason to come together here and see one another. And Jennifer, will the place be available?
I think we have a wedding booked.
So it will be.
There'll be a wedding. Wes and Leah are going to be getting married here. Same day.
Wow.
Great.
As long as there's a party. As long as there's a party.
So thank you all for coming over this way and it's been marvelous to know that you're here. I can't see many of you, but I can feel you and get a feeling of love that surrounds me, and that's an amazing feeling. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, George, happy birthday.
So, Alex, you want to sing your final song?
Yeah, I know. It was just a week or so.
Very touching. Yeah.
Yeah, very
I love
touching.
the American flag.
Yeah, I
Isn't
know.
that perfect?
And he had the $100 bills in his pocket. That was
$100
fun. I think it was
bills,
play money, but he was a wonderful character. I think it'd be good for us to reminisce and just how instrumental he was.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say that if it weren't for George Stoney, there very well might not be any really seriously institutional structures for public access.
Certainly the spirit of public access, I think, you can directly attribute to George's work and his influence. And back, I guess it was in the 70s when he was at NYU and started the I think it was the Alternative Media Center,
with Red
Alternate
Burns.
Media with Red Burns.
Yeah, right.
And those were at that time. He worked with a group of students that went out into the world across the country, and many of them are still involved in public access. And this was, I guess, back in the 70s, but they were really. People that came out of that program were really leaders in the field of building the whole concept of public access around the country, and remain so for to this day. Now, of course, there's been hundreds and hundreds of others that have come after that. Like myself.
Sure.
But that. That was really part of George's legacy that he started that, and not only did he start that, but he stayed involved, all his life. It wasn't, sort of like he, had that initial vision back in the 70s. I mean, he was involved, certainly here at Manhattan Neighborhood Network.
Oh, absolutely, stalwart,
with the Alliance for Community Media.
Yeah, he got that started. Remember that
the
meeting?
national group, which I was involved with for many years as well, and George was a major influence and leader
in getting
and
that
contributor
started.
to that. Yeah,
there was a meeting up in Boston sometime back ago.
There's been.
I remember. I got up to that.
No, they've been meeting. They've been around for many years. And as you mentioned, sort of the institution. That's been. Really an important critical organization in terms of, quote unquote, the institution of public access.
And it might be worthwhile mentioning that venue where we were with the Paulsons, or I used to call them Paulsons, I guess it's the Paulsons, but he was a naturalist, and Betty Paulson was his dear friend, and he's had that, they had a setting out there that's just a beautiful setting built into nature, and they've got a big area with the wetlands and llamas and in a large area, and we've had meetings out there. People were coming, and they would be coming from all over the world to come to this meeting in July. I guess it was near this time.
Right.
Over the
meeting
decade.
sounds a little formal.
No,
really a celebration.
It was a big celebration picnic. Mr. Stallman, he came. He's with the BBC. They would come over and everything. He had a tremendously wide-ranging influence with people of concern with alternate media.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's just public access was one, part of his legacy, and obviously at NYU for many years, teaching documentary filmmaking and influencing, hundreds and hundreds of filmmakers over the years. Through his work there, and then of course his own film work. His own work.
Have you looked much at his body of work?
Well, it's interesting.
It's incredibly good
it
work.
is. It is incredible, and I have over the years, and sort of thinking about George recently, and knowing we were going to talk. I watched. Just the other night, All My Babies, which is probably is maybe the film. I mean, he's known for many things, but that's certainly among the films that he is probably most well known for, and that's in the national film registry,
right,
which I read right next to All About Eve, which I thought was
very
interesting juxtaposition.
Yeah, right. No,
but that was done in the early 50s, I think, about 52.
I'm not sure when it was, but it really
and remarkable. We were talking earlier before we started, just the technique and all of that is there, but the humanity is really, I think, the piece that George is really known for in terms of just presenting people in their situation with such respect and to really share. You just really get a sense of that and these people, and I think that's characteristic of his filmmaking, and sharing that through film, which I think really connected to George's vision of public access, which was certainly all of those things. But I think really George really saw public access as a kind of catalyst within the community.
To actual community organization and achievement by the community in terms of their own desires.
Exactly. It's sort of that, almost the film, might be the starting point of a discussion, of, interaction, of an understanding, of a bridging.
Yeah, and he also said the film
whatever the issue, but that was not, I don't think George ever, he didn't view, his work, his film, or, certainly his vision of public access as that, a program or a film was sort of in isolation of its own thing. It was really, part of a chain, and maybe the beginning, maybe the middle, or whatever, but it was part of something much bigger that involved human interaction and community building
and community building,
humanity and understanding, and I think that's really his. So it's all part of his work and public. It's all I think part of one big vision.
Yeah, part of one big vision that the inspiration of which can inform us well in these times, well as it did then. And he was always of the mind that it would be occasions that would bring people together in community in order to voice their own intentions rather than following some leadership pattern that's being proposed by a political class or something like that.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It was
democracy, it's called. A real effective democracy, participatory democracy, was something he believed in deeply, I think, and that dignity came from the people. And I think at a core, somewhere in public access, there's faith in the fact that dignity can come out of direct democracy and participation by the people in the processes by which the society operates.
Yeah, that's, I think, true. I think I would characterize it, certainly it has a political context, but more as having a voice.
Yes. Right.
Which you can translate, that's maybe another way of saying democracy. But we have to remember it wasn't that long ago that there were very few voices and representations on television.
Oh, sure.
Public access started really when it kind of took off in the 70s. I mean, we could sort of go into the whole history of that and how it was tied to the expansion of cable television and the federal regulations. But, leaving that aside for the moment, it's hard now, even perhaps to remember in the world of YouTube and the internet, where let alone digital cable, where we're just
I know it's just,
it's
tsunami.
It's a tsunami of stuff. But that's a very different world than not that long ago when you had basically three commercial networks. You had public television, which was sort of a little, almost kind of an important, but a bit of a marginal player. And there was certainly local news and things like that. But not that there was not a lot of diversity. Let's put it that way, in terms of voices and people on television, and certainly there was no access. I mean, maybe you saw, somebody, who you thought maybe kind of resembled you or your life experience, but there was certainly no opportunity for you to create that material. I mean, that was even, beyond the beyond.
I know.
And that's really kind of, was the big revolution in public access. I mean, it was really, not only were there going to be this sort of diversity of ideas and people and faces on TV, but that the people creating content, that the content creators, which was a very closed, very, very elite group, all of a sudden that opened wide. Now, maybe we kind of take that for granted. What do you think, Carol? I mean,
well, I would refer to the programming I did last week. I hadn't seen them in about 3 years. My grandkids came through. My two grandsons with my daughter and her husband, and we are on television. And they were 7 years old. One of them, and one of them was 11. And I said to one of them, I was from Detroit. I got personal. I said we were from Detroit, middle class. My dad was a lawyer, and the people next door were dentists. And 1946, I could remember back to 1946, and there had been nothing during the war. Everything went into the war effort. And here was this thing we'd heard about television, but there was literally no programming at all. And the dentist next door took and bought in anticipation a television set and put it in the corner of the living room next door in anticipation. There was an Indian head test pattern. And we would look at the Indian head test pattern. There was literally no programming at all. Finally came Kukla, Fran, and Ollie, and the Goldbergs and that kind of early stuff. But it was really there. Now we got down, there's 1,900 channels on the cable. It's come a long way from those early beginnings.
So it's
and you're absolutely right. Mr. Paley, when he started CBS, had no obligation or inclination to do anything to help the people who are the audience to produce programming. And the only place where that really is effectively being done, it seems to me, I don't think Mr. Gates has any obligation.
No, I think that's a really an important point, because we talk about sort of what public access is, how it started in terms of giving people access, but I think that it's really kind of interesting and important to understand the regulatory structure in which this was possible. It's very, very unusual. Like you said, it's not the case with the internet. But the fact that I mean, the reason, sort of the bureaucratic reason, or the that we have public access, is that cable companies need to use public right-of-way in order to string their cables. So it was a kind of quid pro quo that as part of granting that franchise, we're familiar with that, that there ought to be something sort of that the public gets back, and whether that was in the form of channels, channel capacity, or funds, equipment to help produce and support the local use of those channels. And that's a very kind of radical idea. I mean, we have it, a little bit in terms of perhaps the development of some of our parks, where in exchange for we see that in here in New York, where a large development is allowed to go through, but in exchange for that there is some public benefit in terms of say parkland. And we do have a public sector. We have public education and that kind of thing. We have some of that, but they had no obligation to set up a system by which the people could be having a means to produce technologically well-developed television capability, with the exception of public access, the part of PEG, public education and governmental. They set aside on the ballpark figure 5% of their net of tax earnings for PEG, public education governmental. And the public, the governmental is Mr. Bloomberg and Company in New York, and then education is school system and the universities, and then that leaves 1% of that for this thing where we are now, Manhattan Network in the case of Manhattan, and there's 3,000 across the country. And the idea that there could be a place for people to create television was very, very unique. It is not characteristic of the steel industry or of any other industry or any other part of the economy. No, exactly. And the only thing close to it would be the thing that is called C-SPAN,
where the industry, the public sector industry, has created great and given great support to what Brian Lamb set up with the C-SPAN. And the industry, the whole industry is very proud in a jewel in the crown kind of way with C-SPAN. They might well be able to start taking that attitude toward public access also, although there are some within any human organization, all the way from visionaries to bean counters. There's different...
I think that's true. I guess I see it more, almost more, certainly C-SPAN, is an apt comparison, but I almost see it more analogous to libraries.
Because, public libraries?
Yeah, because we're really talking about, C-SPAN, it's true, that's a, you can watch what's happening in Congress, and that's important. But, with a library, when you think about it, fosters intellectual and creative development. At its heart, it's a sort of window. You can go there, and you can,
well, that's true.
Read books, and you can, formulate, grow intellectually and formulate your ideas and sort of create something. And even now, there are a lot of libraries, in fact, provide internet access and computers, so that's sort of, in a sense, they have kind of kept abreast in terms of access to technology. So
that is true.
I think it's, again, it's sort of with public access, it's sort of there's the audience and there's the producer, and it's kind of facilitating both. Now, in an ideal, and sort of we were talking about with George, sort of that universe comes together, and it's not an either or. It's not one person here, but that that aside, I think that what's unique about public access, it's the tools of creation, and the here at MNN, there's training and workshops, in terms of how to use these tools and, apply your intellect and creativity to do that. And I think that that's, what our best libraries do.
If it may, although if I may, I'm not sure, because the cable industry is a private sector entity, and for them to set aside, set aside beyond taxes and so forth, this thing to support setting up an institution. The public life, the normal society, the news and so forth, and as we think about things, you have two things, really, two major entities or institutional structures. One is called private sector, corporate profit. And then there's the public sector, which is tax and spend, legislate and regulate. Those two things, practically all of the news of the world is reported in a dialectic between those two forces, and that sort of thing. But in the case of public access, it was a very unique moment in 1970 when it started to be rolling out. Right.
Well, you're right in terms of the fact that it's privately supported.
It is.
That is. That's more analogous, I suppose, to public things that are done for the public good in exchange, say, for development rights or things like that.
There would be. But Lord Beaverbrook in England, he could see. He spoke of a newspaper. Or somebody said of a newspaper. Somebody said it's a license to print money. That is, you're going to be distributing something. You're going to bring a cable into the home or institution that can be metered and charged for and turned off if you don't pay. It was a license to print money. They were going to make a lot of money. So they were interested. There was a competition for that. And so they did. And then there was input in that unique moment, I think, around 1970 when cable got rolled out, was a time of that was Woodstock time. That was Martin King, that was Malcolm X, that was civil rights, that was Man on the Moon. There was a lot going on in a sense, and there was input from the civil society, intermediate between those two large ways in which society is viewed, public sector. And input, George would have been one of those major ones. He got started about 1970. The Alternate Media Center got started about 1970 and that sort of thing. And so then it's unique in that sense, and I think it's got a really unique role because it's people then can, the capital costs and the operating costs of this entity here, Manhattan Network, and there are 3,000 of these across the country that the Alliance for Community Media is relating to. They're thought of as the people, And most people within the industry don't tend to think about the people as anything other in the mass than something to sell cornflakes to, or some advertising campaign or something like that. But they do have that, and that's in place, and it makes it possible for people to come and make television credibly with the same kind of equipment that the best people in the industry have access to, without there being any cost, any necessary for the producer to make it a business or have to get a funding source or a big business proposition to make television. They can make it free. And some people would think that defies the laws of physics, because you can't do anything. There's no free lunch, all of the kind of thinking. But it's really impressive in that sense that that's the case. And the cable industry is more or less held to that rule and that view of society, and it is unique. Yes, and for that reason, people can produce programming that has a very small audience, and it's got a potential for representing the people in a way that the established systems aren't able to manifest. If you understand what I'm saying.
No, I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, I think it's really important. If democracy, real democracy, is a good thing, which I tend to think it is, rather than just being led by certain leaders who will tell you what to do. So it's important in a larger sense in terms of the organization of world society, perhaps.
Yeah, it's interesting because again, I think about where is public access now, because in sort of the context of the information world that we live in, and I'm sure that that's something that people do a lot of thinking about here, because there are alternatives. Certainly now we talked about YouTube and other, and I think as I think about that, I think we need to kind of go back to the roots, and we were talking about kind of George and his vision.
Yeah, it was
in that. What's different about public access in the world we live in now is that sense of community, being part of a community, and I think that is really the thing that has to be cultivated.
Right, he certainly believes deeply
because
in that.
It's a lot of the things, sort of the hurdles and barriers that we've discussed. Certainly like equipment, and I mean, very, when we were talking about in the early days, very, very expensive.
I saw a shoot that somebody said we're going to do a shoot with somebody. It went to a studio, go across $4,000 to make a 1-hour program, similar to what we're doing.
Well, I mean, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars before that, but now, I mean, you can. Do something with your smartphone.
Yeah, that's true.
So
well,
but it's true. Kind of, and
it's
but kind of my point is that so that was a huge barrier years ago, was just simply cost, and public access addressed that, because you said provided equipment and facilities at usually no cost. The second thing, just in terms of access to get your program out. When we talked about the world of even before the three networks, when you just have a still screen, that was a huge barrier. And now, with the internet and all of these outlets, well, we've that barrier in a sense has been overcome. So really, at the core. Which has always been the core, is really, okay, well, what, where does what I have to say, what is the relationship to that and the community that I live in, and sort of what is the, how does that exchange happen, how is that facilitated? And I think that's a real sort of role in terms of public access, in terms of, providing the kind of facilitation for that kind of dialogue and the production of that kind of programming. And I think that's, and it's also too, there's always sort of the craft, and there's always going to be a need for that. I mean, just because equipment and those things have become more
Ubiquitous
accessible.
almost.
Storytelling is no easier.
Right.
So that's there's I don't mean to say, oh, now that we've got all these tools, anybody can just like produce. I mean, you can produce some brilliant things, but it is aside from the technology, it isn't giving somebody a pen doesn't make them a great author.
Right.
I mean, you may know how to use it. Very simple to use. Very inexpensive. But there's a lot more to it. Well, I would say,
the same with filming.
Same thing with video. So that's a real role that I think public access centers like Manhattan Neighborhood Network.
I was just thinking historically, coming out of history, we had different communication. We had the Communication Act 1934 and in the 96 and all these different things, and we have an evolving society. And I was thinking of the democracy, the democratic nature of public access for this emerging technological capability of multimedia rather than the radio or even film. And that was coming. And the public access was sort of like, in a sense, out there on the frontier of it in its time. And then I see the internet, by and large, it's coming again. It's private sector and public sector and that kind of thing. But the internet coming to the support of that democratic potentiality that public access was heralding, because there's a great deal of input from the people that is becoming available to them through the technological extensions of our conscious capability to communicate, including exponential increasing of the bandwidth and of what's coming out of the computer labs, as you say, to smartphones. It was a harbinger of what was to come.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it's true the information is growing exponentially. I don't know that our capacity to absorb it is. So
well, I don't know about that either. That's a large question. I had a friend of mine who was an investment banker. His dad, he had taken AOL public when they went public. Mark Stallman, you may know him. He came up with the term Silicon Alley for New York and everything. But his dad was a cyberneticist in a sense in 1948, and he was with Norbert Wiener in the room with about 10 guys or something in 1948 when they coined the term cyber. Because we had the Turing machine, and developments go exponential. It goes very, very slow, like this. And they coined the term cyber, means steersman, right? That's what it means in the Greek alliteration. And then it goes, and then it goes, and then it becomes hyperbolic, and then it becomes exponential. We're at the exponential quality now. But he talked about information overload. A lot of people, we got information overload to the max in many people's mind. There's so much information we have available to us compared to, let's say, smoke signal days of John Ford's view of the 19th century West, and that kind of thing. We have information overload, but it permits pattern recognition. Information overload permits pattern recognition at another level, so that you have a great deal of information that's available to us, just to the citizen, through the internet and now. But what we're able to see are patterns between systems, so we begin to think about whole systems rather than just special parts of it. If you understand, the whole elephant, rather than just having access to some idea of what the trunk is, because that's where you happen to be.
Maybe. It's an interesting theory. I don't know if it's true.
No.
I mean,
well, he proposed that. It's something
I'm not sure.
About.
Maybe people are more confused than ever.
Do you think so?
I don't know. I think the jury is out.
I think you're right. I think the jury's out.
It can work both ways, because one can... certainly there have been studies with this about cable television, but I'm sure it's true of the internet. Is that because of the all of the information that we can be highly selective.
We can become specialized.
We can become. Well, I don't know if it's specialized, but we can become sort of focused on really only what interests us. And what is compatible, with our worldview.
With our worldview,
and that's very easy to do. in
It
this
is.
information.
See,
Because there's I can carve my own
Right,
path.
right.
And by golly, everything I read is going to reinforce,
that
what I
yellow-
already believe.
Yeah, right. And-
Because at least, when there wasn't
a
so
great
much
boon.
out there,
Yeah, yeah,
well, I
right,
might have, if I
right.
was going to watch anything,
Right.
chances are
I
I've seen
did.
something that maybe
did.
didn't quite agree or,
Yeah.
challenged a view
Yeah,
that I
right,
held.
right.
So that's
Yeah, that's
and I
another-
don't think that's
another take on it.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's sort of the opposite of understanding
right.
the big picture.
That's a yellow
it's
brick.
like, you're burrowing more and more narrowly into a very limited picture. So I don't know.
I understand. I hear
I
what
think it
you're-
could work both ways.
Right, right.
but-
That would be the narcissistic dream world, the yellow brick road to narcissism
Exactly.
writ large. It could be, and a
So
lot
I
of that
don't,
might be there.
I don't.
And that is a
I
problem in
don't
the
know
modern world.
where we are. But again, coming
Yeah.
back to public access,
Yeah.
I think that the centers like this and venues like are places where we can discuss, those ideas and just sort of be, aware, aware of those ideas
Right.
and how we. There's a term media literacy, that's been,
Right.
around for a long time, and I think it's as important as ever. When we're exposed to so much, is how do we evaluate it? How do we watch? How do we process
I
it?
used to visit every spring with Marshall McLuhan. And Marshall McLuhan was the oracle of the electronic age and so forth. I never could get what the Yiddish say, Hamish, be warm, but he allowed us how we could sit in on his class. Up in Toronto, we would visit with him up in Toronto. He wrote The Gutenberg Galaxy. I don't know if you've ever, that was a tour de force. And then also Medium is the Message and all the writings he did on the implications of the extended consciousness, because he said the medium is the message. He meant the medium by which the message is conveyed is more important than the message in terms of affecting consciousness. The fact that you're seeing it on television rather than reading it in a book makes more difference than what the content is. And all of this. So trying to understand the implications of extended conscious, because actually all of technology and tools are extensions of our inner consciousness into the environment in a way that's pretty unique to the Homo sapien species, it seems. Now, it's all interrelated as one system, honeybees, and it's all one system. But we have a unique capability of extending our consciousness through tools and technology, unique to humanity, it would seem to me, and make the world.
To be contrary again.
Okay,
it's an opportunity.
Yeah.
But I don't know that it's that it might not have the opposite. If I tell you, when I see, and I'm guilty of it too.
Yeah.
We have our iPhones or our smartphone. Now that's pretty
Well,
an
they're
amazing
packing-
advancement. I mean, in terms of you can make a movie on it, you can watch a
I
movie,
know,
you
it's
can
amazing.
get on the internet
I know.
and so on and so
It's true,
forth.
yeah.
But and I'm sure we've both been in so many situations where you're with people
Yeah.
and
And
they're
texting
glued
with-
to
yeah,
that
yeah,
device.
right,
And maybe that's an expansion of consciousness in some way, but I often wonder if one's consciousness might not be expanded even more, relating to the people and the environment.
Yeah, like
right around
maybe around a
you.
campfire.
Maybe around a campfire.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I don't
Yeah,
know. These
yeah.
are questions.
Yeah.
it's so new. These are questions.
They
that
are.
we're-
It is new, really.
But
'cause
I'm, and then again, you could take the view, which historically every new technology, and medium has been sort of viewed as sort of very threatening.
Oh,
or
yeah,
you're
by
not,
the old guy.
The book, terrible,
right,
terrible.
right,
Books
right.
are terrible.
Or Galileo.
Films,
Yeah.
awful.
Yeah,
So,
right.
so
Yeah.
it just could be, I'm of my time, and sort of my, God.
Don't know what this younger generation is
Exactly.
coming to.
So I don't mean to
Gabby
sound like
Hayes.
that,
Yeah,
but maybe I am sounding a little bit like that.
Well,
But it makes me wonder, because you raise the issue
But the
of
exponential quality
of it being an extension
of
our consciousness and an expression, and I interpret that to mean an expanding. I mean, I think ideally, that would be the case, and I'm not quite that may be the. I'm not quite seeing it yet, but.
Well, that was proposed. That's been proposed by a lot of critical thinking, that it is, after all, like it's a big difference between finding a cave for shelter and building a house. If you can build a house, it's a different quality of control over the environmental context, and you can extend, and then that context in which the social order is seen has feedback mechanisms upon the society. And it's now, so we've got the ability. I don't know. Creatures do. They do. Beavers build dams, don't they?
Yeah.
And honeybees do, without knowing it, pollinate. I don't think we could survive without the honeybees and so forth to do the pollination of the agriculture and other flora, and everything.
But do you wonder, in terms of the using your analogy about finding the cave and building the house.
Well,
it seems now sort of the technology, in some sense, one could argue, is facilitating finding the cave. It's like, with Google, we almost don't have to know anything anymore. You know what I'm saying? It's always out there to be found.
Yeah, well, it's available.
It's available. So I'm just wondering, what does that mean? It's always, we don't have to. There's so much we don't have to retain anymore.
Well, yes and no. I know when I was growing up, middle class, like I said, in Detroit, we had a couple things though on either side of the fireplace. We had the Encyclopedia Britannica you could go to get information. There's an almanac. Yeah. But then we also had the Harvard Classics, which had the classic books you could read, and there's a library you could read. We could do that. But now we've got access to information in a very a new dimension, and it's got algorithmically, it's got such a capability of building institutional structures, technology that creates institutional structures or reifies them. Yeah. And one of the things about it is that after civilization began about 8,000 to 10,000 years ago, when we got agriculture finally, after 200, we begin to know more all the time. We're learning. And we know now, more or less evolutionarily, that we're 200,000 years as a species on this planet. It's interesting science. We know that there was 13.7 billion years ago this universe got started. Yeah. 3.5 million years ago we had the starting of the organic evolutionary process on this planet. Yeah. And then we reach a point where we get, there was Australopithecine, up the hominoid line, from which there came habilis, Homo habilis, a new species appeared, and from that became Homo sapien, our species. We're all African. So we're beginning to know things that can more satisfyingly settle the self-reflective consciousness questions about what's it all about. That's probably characteristic of human consciousness in a unique way. I don't think a crocodile thinks that much about what's it all about, Alfie, in a way that a human consciousness is able. But then they're also able to extend the consciousness and to make tools. And once we got to agriculture, we got to surplus, and we got to civilization, you started having conflicts between various notions of how, and people would very much benefit, the political classes would benefit by the intellectual community coming up with some sort of a weapons system that would give them an advantage over another tribe, that they could go and conquer and influence or co-opt or whatever, have expansion of their system. And so it is, it's called realpolitik, it still holds. And that system finally, of weapons systems, after special theory of relativity, 1905, we kept learning, thermonuclear, Edward Teller, the weapons became, according to the modeling species, lethal. About 1970, about the same time cable was being born. We were coming into a new existential reality in universe in terms of the evolutionary process, if you can understand.
Absolutely.
And that we have on the other side, we had a capability of providing for everybody with an increasingly elegance of design and the ecological capability of providing Moore's law writ large for everybody, and the ecology that could be truly seen as liberating, as opposed to the serf-like condition that was the lot of most of humanity throughout most of history, with a king or emperor ruling and everybody else wallowing around in the mud. more or less, you know. But we were making progress materially to where we could have a liberated humanity that was not equally, it was not able to be available to us historically. We were contained historically within an earlier system, and now we're coming to a time of qualitative transformation that could maybe be confused or be compared to punctuated equilibrium when the new appears in terms of the relationship of an evolutionary process in universe. We're be coming to the end of that. I don't know. A qualitative transformation, not a quantitative extension of just a historical pattern, but a moment of qualitative transformation. When you get to that kind of an existence, you can either liberate in a new kind of way, qualitatively different, or annihilate consciousness called Homo sapien consciousness.
Right.
That makes it some. As a Asimov, we did a program. This is the defining moment,
right?
In a way that all of history has not been, or something.
Well,
under those kind of.
I hear what you're saying, and there are certainly lots of signs that we're we're at a fork in the road, and
more than a fork. More than a fork. I mean, it's like a qualitative. Transformation, perhaps. And there must be a lot of angst in that.
Yes and no. I mean, I think, sort of just to backtrack a little bit, I don't think that this is the only time that people have felt that way about their time.
No, but it is.
Well, that's from our perspective.
You think so, right?
Yeah.
When you can stop conscious evolution, we couldn't do that before. In the Second World War, we were trying to kill each other.
Yeah.
We were impotent evolutionarily in terms of extended capability to kill. We've crossed a major existential line. And we were also imbued with historically inherited institutions which were inherently unjust for so many of the world's population and not able for them to realize their full potential. Which, do you understand?
I understand.
So that there's a quality, it's a moment of like birth. You know, if you have a pregnancy in humanity, 9 months, there's a change, a qualitative change. It's not 6 months, it's not 13, it's now. And that we may have been privileged or cursed to be born into the Chinese warned against being born into interesting times. We may have been born into the most interesting, qualitatively interesting times that a lot of people have tried to convey in the past, but it really is got reason to think this is a moment of qualitative, not just quantitative, historical change. That's all.
Time will tell.
Time will tell. I guess it will. But if in the expansion of that, particularly trying to encourage that idea of a liberating kind of order, is the means of communication of what's going on. And are you optimistic for the human prospect, or do you think about that, or do you think there's any danger that we would do something so foolish as to stop the evolution of conscious evolution in universe?
I don't think that things are so bad that that's a possibility. I think
you don't think it's a possibility?
Well, I don't.
The capability is there.
Sure, anything's possible.
No, it wasn't available in the past.
Right.
It is now.
Well, there have been, species that have been wiped out, we could be, that could happen.
99.9% of all species that have ever existed have gone extinct.
Well, there you go. So maybe it's inevitable. But in terms of, for now, I forget what your question was.
Well, are you optimistic?
you got us down this other path.
I've got us to a point where we're coming to
optimistic?
A point, optimistic for the human prospect, or pessimistic in terms of this existence, and is it correct from the modeling, which seems to be intellectually becoming available, because you're going patterns. You're not going into a specialized thing. You're looking at a pattern, and that interconnects politics, economics, all of these different things. You got a movement going Occupy. They want to change things in a qualitative way. It's all over the world. It's being felt all over the world that there's something, a quickening, there's something coming needed new that is there, and we're looking for it. And people are just tending to reify the outdated context because it's comfortable, as always it has been.
I'm optimistic in the sense that I think it's possible that we can get to sort of the next place that we need to be. I don't think it's inevitable, but I guess I'm optimistic to the sense that I think it's possible.
Well, yeah, it's possible that we could get to a It might be we're coming into a new relationship in the cosmos. like at a species level. We were Australopithecine. We were contained. Homo habilis was contained within Australopithecine 4.7 million years ago. 1.5 million years ago, Homo habilis appeared. 200,000 years, Homo sapien appeared. Now we may be coming to the end of that period, 10,000 generations, in terms of a new relationship to the cosmos becoming characteristic of the material evolutionary process, including the extended consciousness, like James Joyce wrote about, which is technology and communication in our lifetime. You could have lived 200 years ago. It takes decades to invent a tack. Every day there comes over the transom 16 new earth-shattering revolutions in every field. It's like a quickening or something. I mean, and it's all the extension of the consciousness, which is the technology of communication. And George, and things he was doing in the 30s, was building multimedia communication, which is beyond the linear perception of the literate perception that had been the characteristic by which history had been conveyed, and so forth. So he was on the cutting edge of that. It's the way we perceive the environment multi-sensorially, multimedia is there, and public access is a way for people to be involved in that. And the memory of George and the people that got this started, that may be someplace out of the people can come the ideas that will bring a change, rather than the people who are all comfortably ensconced in the outdated institutions, which is called the world establishment. Mm-hmm. I don't know. So in that sense, it would be revolutionary in the best sense of the word. I got carried away a little bit.
Yes, you did.
But anyway,
we got back to George somehow. I'm not quite sure how you did it.
Well, no, he did it by going. He brought forth. Just think, history of communication or film. He was working with 16 millimeter film. There was no video. They had to invent videotape. All these things had to be invented. Mm-hmm. And it does augur well. There's been improvements. I'm glad there's penicillin, aren't you? And
I beg your pardon.
No, I was just saying somebody I was talking to had been Mr. Glimcher. He's the guy that we're going to go see tonight. He's the head of the place where they're going to show this film. And he said he was wounded in the Ardennes, and he was saved by penicillin. Penicillin was a wonderful thing that came. Yeah. You know, there are advances.
Of course,
and that kind of stuff. Yeah. And there's reason to be, but there's still a lot of problems remaining. And I guess that's all we're saying. And George got involved in those films he made, had iconic moments.
Yeah, I guess I would say, you know, getting back to George, and it's true all you said about, you know, his use of the technology and the medium, but at the same time, it was always infused, you know, with his humanity, and I think his vision of humanity, and that's got nothing to do with, or that has anything to do, but that sort of transcends, you know, whatever technology that you're working with. Well, and I think that's an important thing to remember, because as you said, with the rapidity of technological advancements and everything else coming over the transom, as you said, it's, you know, sort of what at the core, what was going to anchor us in terms of, you know, how to use that personally, how it ought to be integrated into society, you know, all of those questions, I think, you know, are rooted in fundamental questions about how we view ourselves, how we view our brothers and sisters in humanity. And George, you know, had, I think, a very clear vision of that. So that, you know, that is, to me, the thing that we ought to remember and hold on to and say, okay, you know, given that root, you know, how do we deal with all of the stuff that's happening? Because you can get lost in the bells and the whistles and the this and then that, and you know, and you sort of forget, you know, who you are. You know, you can, again, you know, you really, it can be, you know, particularly with technology now, it just can be so, you know, all absorbing that you know, and it's and maybe I'm getting back on my thing about, you know, books are bad and films are bad, but I think it's a, you know, it's a real danger kind of getting, you know, sucked into it without being rooted in your own humanity and what, how does what you're doing technologically, how does it relate? How is it furthering those human values? I guess that's the fundamental question that I think we have to keep asking, and that's really a part of what George reminded us.
Absolutely, and then
so often.
And some of the great figures out of history that remind us on eternal principles, perhaps. Yeah. But we do want to be careful about trying to have some sort of an absolute thing that is going to provide a pattern, say, like just in a loose term, a God or a principle that one says that's absolute. There's too much absolutist thinking above the material order, and the universe seems to be synergetic. I mean, it's just behavior of a system that's there's nothing absolute for sure, except that there's a nested hierarchy of understanding, and you get to one and then you're going to get to another. We might be involved in getting to another level where we understand, but you can't know that new context from within the womb, historically, or within an evolutionary process, a material evolutionary intellectual process. And the pace is not going to let up of transformation. It's coming exponential. And exponential is just double, 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 double. We're going to be swimming in all kinds of capability to provide for people that just simply hasn't been there, apparently. So whether we want it to be 9 months, the pregnancy ends, or the system comes to a new order or a new way within evolutionary, punctuated equilibrium. Do you understand? It's like it's going on at a level transcendent to any individual thinking or anything like that. But we want to get the input of people, and we want to get to some sort of systems, elementary justice for all in a way that is now capable of our achievement through design and so forth, that was not characteristic or capable of the level of design that we had historically. It's a new thing like that. It's 100 trillion cells in a human organism. I see from your site that most of those are bacteria. I saw that your site.
Oh God, I'm glad you brought up my site. Before we finish, I got to get a plug-in, right?
We only got a couple.
I do want to talk about what I'm doing now, right?
But I get a kick. Yes, I get a kick. George, I get a kick out of you.
And TV411.org, and it's a site for people to improve their literacy skills, reading, writing, math, science, vocabulary. It's multimedia. We've got lots of videos. We have a cooking show that's on there, TV411 What's Cooking, which brings about issues around bacteria and carbohydrates and photosynthesis.
90% of the cells within a human organism.
There you go. You did your homework. Well, I'm impressed.
100 trillion cells. No, but 100 trillion cells included in a human organism. Every cell matters, and every cell's connected to area. We've got to get to that kind of a comprehensive understanding of the human order and the ecological order. And your site helps bring that. The Khan Institute is another one that gives tutorials that are very important.
That's another. No, that's
mathematics.
They do a lot of math. I mean, those are sort of demonstrations of formulas and things like that. But I would encourage people to visit our site. There's a lot of
give it again.
It's TV411.org. It's an educational site. We have a lot of inspirational portraits of adult writers. People, self-expression. Also, and it gets into math. People, if they're working on a GED, it could help them in terms of preparing for some of the stuff that'll be on the GED. So there's a lot of material, and there's a great cooking show.
That's good.
There's a lot of great stuff on it. So I would encourage people to check the site out.
Very good. I would too encourage you very much, and thanks for all your work.
You bet.
You did a very well led
Thanks for having me here. It was great coming back here.
Quinn, I think you might have been the first executive director of an institution. Thank you for laying the groundwork.
Thank you.
And he was the first exec here at Manhattan Neighborhood Network, and now he's got a great educational effort that he's engaged in. Thanks a lot for all their work. And let's give one more round of applause to George Stoney, the founder of Public Access Television. thanks for viewing. We thank you to tune in. We'll be coming back again tomorrow. Once again, Alex, thank you very much. It's so good to talk. Let's keep talking to each other.
Okay.
It's good to see you again out at that meeting.
Yeah.
And we ought to try and do something henceforth to have a meeting, the George Stoney Day or something in July, to bring all those people together that have been inspired by him.
That's a terrific idea.
And thank you for all your work.
You bet.
Okay, coming back tomorrow. Thank you very much. That's it for now.